The shot kicked up dust 3 inches from her boot, and Faith Keller didn't flinch because she'd learned in her 22 years that showing fear only made predators hungrier. She stood her ground on the rocky soil of her 160 acres, watching 5 riders approach from the direction of the Brennan ranch, their horses kicking up clouds of amber dust in the late afternoon sun of August, 1878. The Kansas prairie stretched endlessly around her modest homestead, golden wheat grass rippling like an ocean under the relentless summer heat. Her father's grave sat beneath a lone cottonwood tree 50 yards behind her, marked with a simple wooden cross she'd carved herself just 3 months prior. "Miss Keller," called out Raymond Brennan, his voice carrying the false politeness of a snake in tall grass. He was a thick man in his 50s, with a gut that spoke of too much whiskey and a face weathered more by greed than honest work. "You're standing on land that should be watering my cattle." Faith wiped the sweat from her brow with the back of her hand, her calico dress already soaked through from a day spent trying to repair the water pump. "This land is mine, Mr. Brennan, filed proper with the land office in Ellsworth. You know that as well as I do." Brennan's 4 ranch hands spread out behind him in a semicircle, their hands resting casually near their gun belts. Faith recognized 2 of them from town: Frank Morris and his younger brother Dale. The other 2 were new, probably hired guns brought in special for this kind of work. "A woman alone has no business trying to work a homestead," Brennan continued, his horse taking another step forward. "It ain't natural. Your daddy, God rest him, he understood how things work out here. He would have sold to me eventual. My father died defending this land from your cattle trampling his crops," Faith said, her voice steady despite the hammering of her heart. "Don't you dare speak of him like you were friends." The words hung in the air like gunpowder smoke. Brennan's face darkened, and his hand moved toward his rifle. Faith's fingers tightened around the old Spencer carbine her father had carried during the war, but she knew the mathematics of this situation. 1 woman against 5 armed men wasn't a fight, it was a massacre. "You've got until sunrise tomorrow to pack your things and clear out," Brennan said. "After that, I can't promise what might happen. Prairie fires start easy this time of year. Accidents happen to folks who don't have neighbors to help them." He wheeled his horse around, and his men followed, leaving Faith standing in a cloud of dust and fury. She didn't lower her rifle until they disappeared over the rise, heading back toward Brennan's sprawling ranch that bordered her property on 2 sides. Only then did she allow herself to shake, the fear she'd been holding back flooding through her limbs like ice water. She walked back to the small cabin her father had built, its log walls chinked with mud and prairie grass, the roof still holding strong despite the winter storms it had weathered. Inside, the single room held everything she owned: a rope bed in the corner, her father's old trunk, a cooking stove that smoked something terrible, and a table with 2 chairs that would never seat 2 people again. Faith set the rifle on the table and sank into one of the chairs, burying her face in her hands. She'd been fighting this battle for 3 months, ever since a fever had taken her father and left her alone on this claim. The land office said the homestead was hers if she could prove it up, build a dwelling, cultivate the land, live on it for 5 years. She'd already lost 1 growing season to grief and learning everything her father had always done himself. She couldn't afford to lose this land, couldn't afford to let Brennan win, but she also couldn't fight 5 armed men alone. The sun was setting, painting the Kansas sky in shades of orange and purple, when Faith heard the sound of an axe biting into wood. She grabbed her rifle and moved to the window, peering out into the gathering dusk. About 100 yards from her cabin, near the creek that marked the northern boundary of her property, a man was cutting timber. Faith's breath caught, The man was massive, easily 6.5 feet tall, with shoulders so broad they seemed to block out the sunset behind him. He wore buckskin trousers and a homespun shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms thick with muscle that flexed with each swing of the axe. His hair was dark brown, falling past his shoulders in waves that caught the last light of day, and a thick beard covered the lower half of his face. He hadn't been there an hour ago. She was certain of it. Faith pushed open the cabin door and stepped outside, rifle at the ready. "You're on private property," she called out, her voice carrying across the prairie grass. The man paused mid-swing, then carefully set down his axe and turned to face her. Even from a distance, Faith could see his eyes were a striking blue, almost startling against his tanned skin. He held up both hands in a gesture of peace. "Name's Fletcher Yates," he said, his voice a deep rumble that seemed to come from somewhere around his boots. "I'm on your property because you need fencing, and you need it before those riders come back." Faith kept the rifle pointed in his general direction, though something about the stranger's calm demeanor made her less afraid than curious. "How do you know about the riders?" "I was hunting elk in the hills when I saw them approach you," Fletcher said, gesturing toward the rocky bluffs that rose to the west of her property. "Watched the whole thing through my scope. Figured a woman standing alone against Raymond Brennan could use some help. You know Brennan." Fletcher's jaw tightened, and even through the beard, Faith could see the muscle jump. "I know his type. Rich man who thinks the land belongs to him just because he wants it. Seen too many small homesteaders driven off by men like him. And what do you want in return for your help?" Faith asked, because nobody did something for nothing, especially not in Kansas in 1878. Fletcher picked up his axe and turned back to the tree he'd been working on. "A place to camp for a while. Been living in the mountains for 3 years, but winter's coming eventual, and I could use a spot to stay that's not a cave." He took another swing and the tree shuddered. "Plus, I don't like bullies." Faith lowered her rifle slowly. She should send this stranger away, should protect her reputation by not allowing a man to camp on her property. But reputation didn't matter much if you were dead or driven off your land, and something about Fletcher Yates felt honest in a way that was rare out here. "All right," she said. "You can camp by the creek, but I'm keeping my rifle loaded, and if you try anything, you'll shoot me," Fletcher finished, and Faith could swear she heard amusement in his voice. "Fair enough. Now you should get inside and bolt your door. I'll keep watch tonight." Faith wanted to argue, wanted to tell him she'd been keeping watch herself for 3 months, but exhaustion was pulling at her bones. She hadn't slept a full night since her father died, always waking at every sound, every whisper of wind against the cabin walls. The thought of someone else standing guard, even a stranger, was almost overwhelming in its appeal. She went back inside and bolted the door as Fletcher had suggested, but she didn't sleep. Instead, she sat by the window with her rifle across her lap, watching the massive silhouette of the mountain man as he worked through the night, cutting timber by moonlight. She could hear the rhythmic sound of his axe, a steady heartbeat in the darkness, and found it oddly comforting. When dawn broke across the Kansas prairie, painting everything in shades of gold and rose, Faith discovered that Fletcher had cut and stripped enough timber to start building fence posts. He'd also caught 3 rabbits, which he was skinning by the creek with practiced efficiency. Faith emerged from the cabin, carrying a pot of coffee she'd brewed. She approached Fletcher cautiously, still not entirely sure what to make of this man who'd appeared like something out of a legend. "Coffee," she offered. Fletcher looked up from his work, and in the morning light, Faith got her first clear look at his face. He was younger than she'd initially thought, probably only 26 or 27, though his eyes held the kind of depth that came from hard living. There was a scar above his left eyebrow, and his nose had been broken at least once, but there was something undeniably handsome about him beneath the rough exterior. "Much obliged," he said, wiping his hands on his trousers before accepting the tin cup she offered. Their fingers brushed in the exchange, and Faith felt a jolt of something she couldn't quite name travel up her arm. "You worked all night," she said, looking at the neat stack of timber posts needed doing. Fletcher took a long drink of the coffee, then nodded approvingly. "This is good, strong." "My father taught me that weak coffee was a sin," Faith said, surprised at how easily the words came. She rarely spoke about her father to anyone, the grief still too raw. Fletcher's eyes softened. "The grave under the cottonwood tree, that's him. 3 months ago, fever took him in 2 days." Faith wrapped her arms around herself, despite the already building heat of the August morning. Brennan showed up a week later with his first offer to buy the land, been escalating ever since. "He won't stop," Fletcher said bluntly. "Men like that, they see what they want and they take it. Laws don't mean much out here when the nearest marshal is 2 days' ride away. So what do you suggest I do? Just give up everything my father and I worked for?" Fletcher set down his coffee cup and stood, his full height impressive in the morning light. "No, we build fences, strong ones. We make it clear this land is claimed and defended, and we stand guard together until Brennan realizes you're not alone and not leaving." "Why would you do this?" Faith asked, searching his face. "You don't know me. This isn't your fight." Fletcher was quiet for a long moment, his blue eyes distant as if looking at something far beyond the Kansas horizon. "I had a sister once, Emma. She and her husband tried to homestead in Montana Territory. Rich rancher wanted their water rights. They were found dead in their burned cabin 5 years ago. Nobody ever faced justice for it." Faith's breath caught at the pain in his voice, the old grief that mirrored her own. "I'm sorry." "So am I," Fletcher said. "But sorry doesn't bring people back, and it doesn't stop men like Brennan. Action does. So, Faith Keller, will you let me help you fight for what's yours?" The use of her first name should have felt presumptuous, but instead it felt natural, like they'd known each other longer than a single night. Faith looked at this mountain man with his massive frame and gentle eyes and made a decision that would change everything. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will." They spent the morning planning the fence line. Fletcher had a practical knowledge of homesteading that Faith lacked, explaining how to mark boundaries in a way that would hold up legally and physically. They would need to fence the entire 160 acres eventually, but for now, they focused on the side that bordered Brennan's ranch and the crucial water access along the creek. "Brennan's been letting his cattle drink from your creek," Fletcher observed, pointing to the numerous hoof prints and cattle droppings along the bank. "That's part of why he wants you gone. You fence this off, he'll have to drive his herd 3 miles to the next water source." "This is my water," Faith said firmly. "He has no right to it. In principle, you're correct. In practice, possession tends to be 9/10 of the law out here." Fletcher knelt down, examining the soil. "Good news is this ground will hold posts well. We'll need to dig deep, set them in right. Make it too much trouble for his men to just tear down in the night." They worked through the day, Fletcher doing the heavy digging while Faith measured and marked where each post should go. The Kansas sun beat down mercilessly, and by noon, Fletcher had stripped off his shirt, working in just his trousers and boots. Faith tried not to stare, but it was impossible not to notice the way his muscles moved beneath sun-bronzed skin, the strength in every movement as he drove the post-hole digger into the hard prairie earth. She'd never been particularly interested in men before. There had been a boy back in Ohio before she and her father had headed west, but that felt like a lifetime ago, an innocent childhood fancy. What she felt watching Fletcher work was entirely different, a visceral, adult awareness that made her skin feel too tight and her breath come shorter. "You should drink more water," Fletcher said, straightening up and catching her watching him. "Heat like this, you'll get sick." Faith felt her cheeks flush, though she could blame that on the sun. "I could say the same to you." Fletcher's mouth quirked in what might have been a smile beneath his beard. "Fair point." He walked to the creek and dunked his whole head in the water, coming up with his hair streaming and water droplets catching the light like diamonds. He shook his head like a dog, and despite everything, Faith laughed. The sound startled her. She couldn't remember the last time she'd laughed. Fletcher looked at her with surprise that matched her own, then his expression softened into something warm. "You should do that more often." "Do what?" "Laugh. Smile. You're carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders, but you're still young, Faith. Should be more laughter in your life." The observation was so unexpected, so kind, that Faith felt her throat tighten with emotion. "Haven't had much to laugh about lately." "Then we'll have to change that," Fletcher said simply, and went back to work. By late afternoon, they'd set a dozen posts along the creek boundary. It was hard, exhausting work, but there was something deeply satisfying about seeing the physical manifestation of her claim taking shape. Fletcher worked with the steady efficiency of someone who'd done manual labor his entire life, never complaining, never slowing. Faith had just brought out bread and cheese for a late lunch when she heard horses approaching. Her hand immediately went to her rifle, but Fletcher laid a gentle hand on her arm. "Just one rider," he said quietly. "Coming from town, not from Brennan's place." He was right. A single horse and rider crested the rise, and Faith recognized Doc Hartley, Ellsworth's only physician and one of the few people who'd shown her kindness since her father's death. "Miss Keller," Doc Hartley called out, waving his hat. He was a slender man in his early 50s, with wire-rimmed spectacles and the perpetually concerned expression of someone who'd seen too much suffering. "I was heading out to check on the Morrison family and thought I'd stop by, see how you were managing." Faith walked out to meet him, aware of Fletcher standing a few paces behind her, a silent protective presence. "I'm well, Doctor. Thank you for checking." Doc Hartley's eyes traveled from Faith to Fletcher to the fence posts behind them, and understanding dawned on his face. "I see you found some help. That's good, very good." He lowered his voice. "Faith, I heard some talk in town this morning. Brennan's been telling folks he's going to have this land one way or another. There's some as are taking bets on how long you'll last." Anger flared hot in Faith's chest. "Let them bet. I'm not going anywhere." "I'm glad to hear it, but you need to be careful. Brennan's hired 2 new men and they've got a reputation. Gunfighters out of Missouri." Doc Hartley glanced at Fletcher again. "No offense to your friend here, but 2 against 1, plus Brennan's regular hands. I can handle myself," Fletcher said quietly. And there was something in his voice that made Doc Hartley reassess the mountain man with sharper eyes. "You've got the look of a soldier about you," the doctor observed. "Was. Long time ago." Fletcher didn't elaborate, and Faith found herself curious about his past, about what had driven a man to live alone in the mountains for 3 years. Doc Hartley reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small package wrapped in brown paper. "I brought you some medical supplies. Bandages, carbolic acid, laudanum, just in case." The unspoken implication hung heavy in the air in case of violence, in case of injury, in case things went as badly as everyone seemed to expect. "Thank you," Faith said, accepting the package. "What do I owe you?" "Nothing. Consider it a loan between neighbors." Doc Hartley tipped his hat to both of them. "I'll be checking on you regular if that's all right. And if you need anything at all, you send word to town." After the doctor left, Faith stood holding the package of medical supplies, the weight of it feeling heavier than it should. Fletcher moved to stand beside her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his skin in the cooling evening air. "Good man," Fletcher observed. "You've got at least one ally in town." "One ally against the richest rancher in the county," Faith said. "Those aren't good odds." "Odds don't matter when you're fighting for what's right." Fletcher looked down at her, and Faith was struck by how blue his eyes were, like the Kansas sky on a clear winter day. "I know you don't know me, Faith. I'm just a stranger who walked out of the mountains. But I give you my word I won't let Brennan take this land from you. Whatever it takes." The intensity in his voice, the absolute certainty, made Faith's heart skip. She'd been alone for so long, carrying this burden by herself, and here was this man offering not just help but a promise, a vow. She didn't understand why it moved her so deeply, but standing there with the sun setting behind them and the first fence posts of her defense standing tall, Faith felt something shift inside her chest. "Why?" she whispered. "Why do you care so much?" Fletcher reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and tucked a strand of hair that had escaped her bun behind her ear. His fingers were calloused and rough, but his touch was extraordinarily gentle. "Because you're standing here fighting instead of running. Because you've got the same look in your eyes my sister had: determination, fire, hope. And because—" He paused, seeming to search for words. "Because the moment I saw you standing alone against those 5 riders, refusing to back down, something in me recognized something in you. Can't explain it better than that." Faith's breath caught. She should step back, should maintain proper distance, but she found herself swaying forward instead, drawn by something she didn't fully understand. Fletcher's hand slid from her ear to cup her cheek, his palm warm and solid, and for a moment the entire prairie seemed to hold its breath. Then Fletcher stepped back, dropping his hand. "I should finish setting those last posts before it gets full dark. You should eat something, rest. Tomorrow we'll start stringing wire." Faith nodded, not trusting her voice, and watched him walk back toward the creek. Her cheek still tingled where he'd touched her, and she pressed her own hand there, feeling foolish and young and alive in a way she hadn't felt in months. That night, Faith did sleep, lulled by the knowledge that Fletcher was keeping watch outside. She woke once in the deep hours before dawn and looked out to see him sitting by a small fire, his rifle across his knees, his eyes scanning the darkness. The sight filled her with a warmth that had nothing to do with the summer heat. The next day dawned clear and hot, another Kansas scorcher that promised to bake the earth dry. Faith and Fletcher worked side by side, stringing barbed wire between the posts they'd set. The wire was expensive. Faith had used most of her remaining money to buy 3 large spools from the general store in Ellsworth, but it was necessary. Barbed wire was the great equalizer on the frontier, the way small homesteaders defended their claims against open-range cattlemen. Fletcher handled the wire with practiced ease, despite its vicious barbs. "Had a friend in Montana who worked for one of the big ranchers," he explained as he stretched the wire tight between posts. "Taught me the trick is to respect it but not fear it. Wire can sense fear." Faith laughed despite herself. "Wire can sense fear, absolutely. That's when it reaches out and gets you." As if to demonstrate, a barb caught his forearm, tearing a shallow cut. Blood welled up immediately, but Fletcher just wiped it away on his trousers and kept working. "You should clean that," Faith said, concerned. "Let me get the carbolic acid Doc Hartley brought. It's nothing." "Fletcher." She used her firmest voice, the one she'd learned from her father when dealing with stubborn livestock. "Sit down and let me tend it. Infection out here can kill you just as sure as a bullet." For a moment, she thought he'd argue, but then he nodded and sat on one of the fence posts they hadn't planted yet. Faith retrieved the medical supplies and knelt in front of him, carefully cleaning the cut. This close, she could see the other scars on his arm's old knife wounds, what looked like a bullet graze, the marks of a hard life. "You've been hurt before," she observed quietly, dabbing carbolic acid on the cut. Fletcher hissed slightly at the sting but didn't pull away. "Comes with the territory. Lived rough for a long time." "Why?" Faith wrapped a clean bandage around his forearm, her fingers gentle. "Why live in the mountains alone for 3 years?" Fletcher was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost lost beneath the whisper of wind through the prairie grass. "After Emma and her husband died, I went looking for the men who did it. Found them too. There was a fight. I survived. They didn't. The law said it was self-defense, but I had blood on my hands either way. Couldn't stomach being around people for a while after that. The mountains were clean, honest. A bear tries to kill you, it's not personal. It's just nature." Faith finished tying off the bandage but didn't release his arm. Instead, she ran her thumb gently over the clean cloth, a gesture of comfort. "I'm sorry you went through that. I'm sorry about your sister. I'm sorry about your father." Fletcher turned his hand over, catching her fingers in his. His hand was huge, completely engulfing hers, but his grip was careful, mindful of his strength. "Grief is a heavy thing to carry alone." "Yes," Faith whispered, and felt tears prick her eyes for the first time since the funeral. She'd been so focused on survival, on fighting Brennan, on keeping the homestead, that she hadn't allowed herself to truly mourn. But something about Fletcher's presence, his understanding, cracked the dam she'd built around her sorrow. A tear slid down her cheek, and before she could wipe it away, Fletcher was there, brushing it away with his thumb, the gesture achingly tender from such a large, rough man. "It's all right to cry," he said softly. "It's all right to feel it." And Faith did. She let herself cry for the first time since they'd buried her father, great wrenching sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep in her soul. Fletcher pulled her against his chest, wrapping his massive arms around her, and Faith clung to him, her fingers fisting in his shirt, her tears soaking the fabric. He didn't offer empty platitudes or tell her everything would be fine. He just held her, one hand stroking her hair, murmuring wordless sounds of comfort, and somehow that was exactly what she needed. When the storm finally passed, Faith pulled back, embarrassed by her breakdown. "I'm sorry." "I didn't mean to." "Don't apologize for being human," Fletcher said, still holding her loosely, as if reluctant to let her go completely. "You've been strong for too long. Everyone breaks eventually. Better to break with someone to help put you back together than to shatter alone." Faith looked up at him, at this mountain man with his scarred hands and gentle heart, and felt something fundamental shift inside her. This wasn't just gratitude for his help or relief at having an ally. This was something deeper, more dangerous, more real. "Fletcher," she started, not even sure what she wanted to say, but the sound of approaching horses cut her off. Fletcher was on his feet instantly, his hand going to the rifle he'd propped against a nearby post. Faith grabbed her own gun, her heart hammering, but these weren't Brennan's men. 3 wagons were coming from the direction of town, and as they got closer, Faith recognized the families: the Andersons, the Schmidts, and the Johnsons, all homesteaders with claims scattered around Ellsworth. Samuel Anderson, a weathered farmer in his 40s, raised his hand in greeting as he pulled his wagon to a stop. "Miss Keller," he called out, "hope you don't mind us dropping by." Faith and Fletcher exchanged glances, then walked out to meet the wagons. Mrs. Anderson, a plump woman with kind eyes, climbed down with a basket over her arm. "We heard in town what Brennan's been doing," she said, her German accent thick but her English clear. "Heard he's trying to drive you off your claim, We came to help." Faith felt her throat tighten again, but this time with gratitude rather than grief. "I don't understand." Samuel Anderson spat tobacco juice into the dirt. "What's to understand? Brennan's been pushing us all around for years, but most of us have husbands, sons, multiple families to call on. You're out here alone, or you were until your friend showed up." He nodded to Fletcher with approval. "Figure it's about time us homesteaders stood together. We help you build your fence today, maybe you help Schmidt with his harvest next month. That's how communities work." Over the next several hours, Faith watched in amazement as her neighbors transformed her property. The men worked with Fletcher to set posts and string wire at a pace that would have taken the two of them weeks. The women helped Faith start preparing food for everyone, transforming her meager supplies with contributions from their own stores. "Your young man there," Mrs. Anderson said as she rolled out biscuit dough on Faith's table. "He is good man, yes, strong, protective." Faith felt her cheeks heat. "He's not we're not, he's just helping with the fence." Mrs. Schmidt, a sharp-eyed woman who missed nothing, made a knowing sound. "My Heinrich looked at me the way that mountain man looks at you. We've been married 23 years now, have 7 children. You mark my words, girl. That man is courting you even if neither of you knows it yet." "We barely know each other," Faith protested weakly. "How long did it take you to know you could trust him with your life?" Mrs. Anderson asked shrewdly. "1 day. Less. The heart knows faster than the head always." Faith looked out the window to where Fletcher was working alongside the other men. As if sensing her gaze, he looked up and their eyes met across the distance. He smiled, and Faith felt her heart do something complicated in her chest. Maybe Mrs. Anderson was right. Maybe the heart did know faster than the head. By the time the sun set, Faith's property was transformed. Strong fences now marked her boundaries on 3 sides, with the 4th side which bordered open prairie rather than Brennan's land left for later. The men had even built a small corral near the cabin and reinforced her well with new timber. As the families prepared to head back to their own homesteads, Samuel Anderson pulled Faith aside. "Brennan won't like this," he said quietly. "He'll see this as all of us standing against him, which it is. Things might get worse before they get better." "I know," Faith said, "and I'm sorry if I've brought trouble to you all." "You didn't bring nothing but an opportunity to do what's right," Anderson said firmly. "We're all tired of Brennan acting like he owns the whole county. Maybe it's time someone stood up to him, and if that someone is a slip of a girl and a mountain man, then so be it." He clapped Fletcher on the shoulder as the big man approached. "You take care of her, son. She's good people." "I intend to," Fletcher said, and the simple declaration made Faith's breath catch. After the last wagon had disappeared over the horizon, Faith and Fletcher stood together in the gathering dusk, looking at what had been accomplished. The fences stood strong and straight, physical proof that Faith Keller's homestead was claimed and defended. "I've never had people come together like that for me," Faith said softly. "Never had a community like this." "You've earned their respect," Fletcher said. "Standing up to Brennan, refusing to run, people admire courage." "I've just been too stubborn to know when to quit," Fletcher laughed, a deep rumbling sound that Faith was starting to love. Stubbornness and courage often look the same from the outside. They went inside, and Faith prepared a simple dinner of salt pork and beans, supplemented by the fresh bread Mrs. Anderson had insisted on leaving. They ate in comfortable silence, the kind that only happens between people who have moved past the need to fill every quiet moment with words. "I should check the perimeter before full dark," Fletcher said after they'd cleaned up. "Make sure everything's secure." "I'll come with you," Faith said immediately. Fletcher looked like he might argue, but then he nodded. "All right, but bring your rifle." They walked the fence line together as the stars began to emerge overhead, the vast Kansas sky a dome of deepening purple scattered with diamonds. Fletcher checked each post, making sure they were solid, testing the wire tension. Faith watched him work, noting the way he moved with such confidence, such capability. "You know," she said as they walked along the creek boundary, "you never did say where you learned to build fences like this." "Grew up on a farm in Kentucky," Fletcher said. "Before the war. My pa raised tobacco and corn, had about 300 acres. I was the oldest of 5, so I learned every kind of farm work there was." "What happened to the farm?" Fletcher's jaw tightened. "War happened. Pa and I both joined up with the Union in '61. He died at Shiloh in '62. I made it through to the end, came home in '65 to find the farm gone to taxes and ma dead of pneumonia. My younger siblings had been taken in by various relatives. Emma and I tried to keep the family together, but," he shrugged, "life had other plans. She married and headed west. I drifted for a few years, then followed her to Montana Territory. Got there just in time to bury her." The pain in his voice was raw even after all these years. Faith stopped walking and touched his arm, making him turn to face her. In the starlight his eyes were shadowed, but she could see the old grief there, the wounds that never quite healed. "I'm sorry," she said. "Sorry for all of it. The war, your parents, your sister. It's not fair what life took from you." "Life isn't fair," Fletcher said. "But sometimes, if you're lucky, it gives you something unexpected to make up for what you lost." His hand came up to cup her cheek again, the gesture becoming familiar. "Like meeting a stubborn woman with fire in her eyes who refuses to back down." Faith's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. "Fletcher, I know it's too soon," he said quietly. "I know we've barely known each other 3 days, but Faith, I need you to know this isn't just about helping you keep your land. This isn't just about standing guard or building fences. When I look at you, I see everything I thought I'd lost: hope, future, home." "I feel it too," Faith whispered. "I don't understand it, but I feel it, like I've been waiting for you without knowing I was waiting." Fletcher leaned down slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, but Faith didn't move. She tilted her face up to his, and when their lips met, it felt like coming home after a long journey. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, but then Faith's arms went around his neck and Fletcher pulled her closer, and gentle became urgent, became necessary as breathing. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Fletcher rested his forehead against hers. "I want to court you properly," he said. "Want to do this right. You deserve that." "Out here there's not much call for proper courting," Faith said, still dizzy from the kiss. "But yes, Fletcher Yates, you can court me." They walked back to the cabin hand in hand, and Faith felt lighter than she had in months. But that lightness evaporated when they crested the small rise that gave a view of her property and saw orange flames in the distance. "The north fence," Fletcher said grimly. "They're burning it." He took off running, and Faith ran after him, both of them heading toward the fire that was consuming the fencing they'd worked so hard to build. As they got closer, Faith could see it wasn't just the fence burning. Someone had set fire to a stack of extra timber they'd left by the creek. Fletcher grabbed a shovel and started throwing dirt on the flames while Faith ran to the creek, filled a bucket, and began hauling water. They worked frantically, fighting the fire before it could spread to the dry prairie grass. If that happened, the entire homestead could burn. It took an hour of hard work, but they finally got the flames under control. Faith stood panting, her face smudged with soot, looking at the damage. About 30 feet of fence was destroyed, the wire melted and useless, the posts charred black. "Brennan's men," Fletcher said, his voice cold with fury. "They didn't even try to hide it. Look." He pointed to clear boot prints in the soft earth near the creek, multiple sets leading to and from the direction of Brennan's ranch. Faith felt rage build hot in her chest. "He's trying to make me afraid," she said. "Trying to show me he can strike whenever he wants." "It's more than that," Fletcher said, examining the ground more carefully. They were careful not to let it spread to the grass. This was a warning, not an attempt to burn you out completely. "He's escalating gradually, trying to break your will without doing something so obvious that it brings the law down on him." "There is no law out here," Faith said bitterly. "Then we make our own." Fletcher straightened up, his expression hard. "Tomorrow I'm riding into Ellsworth. Going to send some telegrams, call in some favors. If Brennan wants to play rough, he'll learn that you're not defenseless." Faith wanted to ask what favors, what friends, but the look on Fletcher's face stopped her. This was the soldier, the man who'd hunted down his sister's killers. This was the dangerous side of the gentle giant who'd held her while she cried. "What about tonight?" she asked. "What if they come back?" Fletcher's hand moved to the pistol at his belt, and Faith noticed for the first time that he wore it like a man who knew how to use it. "Tonight, I stand guard, and if they come back, they'll learn that setting fires on someone's property is a good way to get shot." "Fletcher, I don't want you to what? Defend what's yours, defend you." Fletcher moved closer, his intensity almost overwhelming. "Faith, I meant what I said earlier. You're not alone in this anymore. Whatever comes, we face it together." That night, Fletcher kept watch while Faith tried to sleep, but every sound brought her fully awake, her hand reaching for the rifle. Finally, around midnight, she gave up and went outside to join him. Fletcher had built up the fire and was sitting with his back against the cabin wall, his rifle across his knees. He looked up as she approached, and his expression softened. "Can't sleep." "Can't stop thinking," Faith admitted, sitting down beside him. "About Brennan, about the fire, about what might happen next." "Fear is good," Fletcher said. "Keeps you sharp. It's when you stop being afraid that you get careless." They sat in silence for a while, watching the flames dance and listening to the night sounds of the prairie crickets chirping, an owl hooting somewhere in the distance, the whisper of wind through the grass. "Tell me something good," Faith said suddenly. "Tell me about something beautiful you saw in the mountains." Fletcher considered for a moment, then began to speak, his deep voice painting pictures in the darkness. "There was a valley I found in the second year, high up where the air was thin and cold even in summer. It had a lake in the center, so clear you could see fish swimming 20 feet down. In the morning, when the sun hit it just right, the whole surface would turn to gold. I'd sit on the shore and watch elk come down to drink, watch eagles fishing, watch the world turn without needing a single thing from me." "It sounds peaceful," Faith said wistfully. It was, but it was lonely too. Fletcher looked at her, and in the firelight his eyes were warm. "I thought I wanted that loneliness, thought it would heal something in me. But all it did was give me time to realize that peace without someone to share it with is just another kind of emptiness." Faith reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "You're not alone anymore either." "No," Fletcher agreed, squeezing her hand gently. "No, I'm not." As dawn broke, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Faith must have dozed off against Fletcher's shoulder because she woke to find herself covered with his jacket, his arm around her shoulders. Fletcher was still awake, still alert, still keeping watch. "You didn't sleep at all," she said, sitting up. "I'm used to it. Spent a lot of nights in the mountains staying alert for bears and mountain lions. At least here I don't have to worry about being eaten." Faith stood and stretched, her back protesting from sleeping sitting up. "You can't keep this up. You need to rest." "I'll sleep when I get back from town," Fletcher promised. "Right now, I need to send those telegrams and pick up some supplies. Will you be all right alone for a few hours?" Faith wanted to say yes, wanted to be brave, but the memory of the fire was too fresh. "I'll manage," she said, which wasn't quite the same thing. Fletcher studied her face, then nodded. "Keep your rifle close. If anyone rides up, you get inside the cabin and bar the door. Don't try to be a hero." "I could say the same to you." "I'm too mean to die," Fletcher said with a slight smile. "Besides, I've got too much to live for now." He saddled up his horse, a sturdy buckskin gelding he'd left picketed near the creek, and rode out as the sun cleared the horizon. Faith watched until he disappeared from sight, then went about her morning chores, constantly scanning the horizon for any sign of riders. The hours crawled by. Faith repaired tools, cleaned the cabin, tried to do anything to keep busy and not think about Fletcher riding into town alone, about what Brennan might do if he knew the mountain man was away. She was just starting to prepare a midday meal when she heard a horse approaching. Faith grabbed her rifle and went to the door, relief flooding through her when she saw it was just Doc Hartley again. But her relief turned to concern when she saw his face. "Faith," he said, dismounting quickly. "Is Fletcher here? He went into town. Why, what's wrong?" Doc Hartley glanced around nervously. "I passed Brennan's men on the road. They were talking about how they'd burned your fence last night, laughing about it. When they saw me, they went quiet, but Faith, I heard one of them say something about finishing the job tonight." Fear coiled cold in Faith's stomach. "What does that mean?" "I don't know for certain, but I think they are planning something bigger. I rode straight here to warn you. Where did Fletcher go in town? The telegraph office, I think, and the general store." "I'll find him, send him back immediately." Doc Hartley mounted up again. "You bar yourself inside and don't open the door for anyone but us. You understand?" Faith nodded, and the doctor rode off at a gallop. She went inside and barred the door as instructed, then positioned herself by the window with her rifle, watching and waiting. An hour passed. Then two. The sun moved across the sky, and Faith's nerves stretched tighter with each minute. Where was Fletcher? Where was Doc Hartley? What if Brennan's men had intercepted them in town? When she finally heard horses approaching, Faith's finger tightened on the trigger, but then she recognized Fletcher's buckskin and Doc Hartley's bay. Behind them rode two more men she didn't recognize. She unbarred the door and stepped out as they arrived. Fletcher dismounted and was at her side immediately, his hands on her shoulders. "Are you all right? Did anyone come?" "I'm fine. No one's been here." "Fletcher, who are these men?" The two strangers dismounted, and Faith got a better look at them. One was a lean man in his 30s with a deputy's star pinned to his vest. The other was older, perhaps 50, with iron gray hair and the bearing of a military officer. "Faith, this is Deputy Marshal James Corrigan from Dodge City, and this is Captain William Frost, formerly of the Union Army and currently a land agent working for the federal government." Faith looked between them in confusion. "I don't understand." Fletcher's hand found hers. "I sent telegrams to some old Army friends. I knew Corrigan had taken a position as a federal marshal, and I knew Captain Frost was investigating land fraud in Kansas. Turns out, Brennan's been falsifying his land claims, using forgery and intimidation to expand his holdings illegally." Captain Frost stepped forward, his voice crisp and official. "Miss Keller, I've been gathering evidence against Raymond Brennan for 6 months. What I needed was a case strong enough to make charges stick and witnesses willing to testify. Fletcher's telegram gave me both. Doc Hartley has agreed to testify about Brennan's threats against you. Your neighbors are willing to speak about intimidation they've faced. With the evidence of arson from last night which Fletcher and I documented this morning, we finally have enough to act." "What does that mean?" Faith asked, hardly daring to hope. "It means," Deputy Marshal Corrigan said, his voice carrying the weight of law, that we're riding out to the Brennan ranch right now to place him and his hired guns under arrest. It means this ends today, Miss Keller. Faith felt her knees go weak, and Fletcher's arm went around her waist, supporting her. It's really over. Not quite yet, Fletcher said grimly. We still have to actually arrest him, and Brennan has a dozen men who might not take kindly to seeing their boss in chains. That's why you're staying here safe while we handle this. Absolutely not, Faith said immediately. This is my fight too. Faith, no, Fletcher, I've stood up to Brennan's threats. I've built fences and put out fires and refused to run. I'm not hiding now when justice finally comes. She looked at Captain Frost. I'm going with you. The captain assessed her with sharp eyes, then nodded. She has the right, Fletcher. It's her land, her case. If she wants to see this through, that's her choice. Fletcher looked like he wanted to argue, but then his expression softened. You're the stubbornest woman I've ever met. You say that like it's a bad thing, Faith replied, and was rewarded with a quick smile. Not bad, just terrifying. Fletcher kissed her forehead quickly. But if you're coming, you stay behind me at all times. Agreed, agreed. They rode out together, the five of them making their way across the prairie toward Brennan's sprawling ranch. Faith's heart pounded, but she kept her chin up and her back straight. Fletcher rode beside her, close enough that their knees occasionally touched, a constant reminder that she wasn't alone. The Brennan ranch was an impressive spread, a large two-story house, multiple barns and outbuildings, corrals full of horses and cattle. As they rode into the yard, men began emerging from various buildings, their hands moving toward their guns. Hold! Deputy Marshal Corrigan's voice rang out with authority. I'm a federal deputy marshal, and I have warrants for the arrest of Raymond Brennan and multiple members of his workforce. Anyone who interferes will be charged with obstruction of justice and assaulting a federal officer. Now, someone fetch Brennan. Now, for a long moment, nobody moved. Then the front door of the house opened, and Raymond Brennan himself stepped out onto the porch, a cigar clenched between his teeth. Marshal, he said, his voice dripping with false cordiality. To what do I owe this visit? Captain Frost urged his horse forward. Raymond Brennan, you're under arrest for land fraud, falsifying government documents, arson, intimidation, and attempted murder. You have the right to. This is absurd, Brennan interrupted, but there was a flicker of genuine fear in his eyes now. I don't know what lies this little tramp has been telling you. Fletcher's horse moved before Faith could stop him, and suddenly the big man was off his mount and up on the porch, his hand fisted in Brennan's shirt, lifting the older man off his feet. Call her that again, Fletcher said, his voice deadly quiet, and federal arrest will be the least of your problems. Fletcher, Captain Frost's voice was sharp. Stand down. Let the law handle this. For a moment, Faith thought Fletcher might refuse, might let his protective fury overwhelm his sense. But then he released Brennan, who staggered backward, red-faced and gasping. You're finished, Brennan, Fletcher said. Your reign of terror over these homesteaders is done. Deputy Marshal Corrigan moved in with iron shackles, and as he secured them around Brennan's wrists, several of the ranch hands started forward. But Captain Frost pulled a sheaf of papers from his saddlebag. I have warrants here for Frank Morris, Dale Morris, John Crawford, and Samuel Tucker. The rest of you men have a choice: cooperate with this investigation and face minor charges, or resist and face the full weight of federal law. What's it going to be? The ranch hands looked at each other, then at their boss being led toward a horse in shackles, and one by one, they raised their hands in surrender. The Morris brothers and the two hired guns Fletcher had mentioned were separated from the group and placed under arrest as well. It was over in less than an hour. Faith watched in a daze as the men who'd terrorized her, who'd burned her fence and threatened her life, were led away in chains. It felt surreal, like something from a dime novel rather than her actual life. "Miss Keller," Captain Frost said, riding over to where she sat her horse. "You'll need to come into Ellsworth tomorrow to make a formal statement, but I wanted you to know we found documents in Brennan's office that show he's been doing this for years. You weren't his first victim, just the first one brave enough to stand your ground long enough for us to build a case. You should be proud." "I couldn't have done it without help," Faith said, looking at Fletcher, who'd remounted his horse and moved to her side. "No," the captain agreed. "But you had the courage to accept that help and keep fighting. That matters." As they rode back toward her homestead, the sun beginning its descent toward the western horizon, Faith felt lighter than she had in months. The threat was gone. The land was hers, truly and completely hers now. She'd won. Fletcher rode close beside her, and when their eyes met, he smiled a full, genuine smile that transformed his face from merely handsome to heartbreakingly beautiful. "We did it," Faith said, still hardly believing it. "You did it," Fletcher corrected. "I just helped." "You did more than help, and you know it." Faith reached across the space between their horses and took his hand. "You saved me, Fletcher, in more ways than one." "Well," Fletcher said, his thumb stroking across her knuckles, "you saved me right back. I was dead inside when I came down from those mountains, Faith. Just existing, not really living. You reminded me what it feels like to have something worth fighting for." They arrived back at the homestead as the sun painted the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Fletcher helped Faith down from her horse, his hand spanning her waist, and for a moment they just stood there, close enough to share breath, looking at each other in the fading light. "Faith," Fletcher said softly, "I know this is fast. I know we've only known each other a handful of days. But I'm not a man who believes in wasting time or hiding what I feel. When I look at you, I see my future. I see a home, a family, everything I thought I'd lost. And if you'll have me, if you'll let a scarred-up mountain man court you proper and build a life with you, then I swear I'll spend every day making sure you never regret it." Faith's eyes filled with tears, but they were happy tears this time, tears of joy and hope and overwhelming emotion. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes to all of it, Fletcher, to courting and building and a future together. Yes." Fletcher cupped her face in both his huge hands and kissed her with a tenderness that belied his size and strength. Faith kissed him back with all the pent-up emotion of the past month's grief and fear, and loneliness transformed into hope and love and belonging. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Fletcher rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Faith Keller. I know it's too soon to say it, but it's true anyway." "I love you too," Faith said, and felt the truth of it resonate through her entire being. "I think I have since the moment I saw you cutting timber by the creek, this stranger who appeared exactly when I needed him most." They stood together as the stars began to emerge overhead, the vast Kansas sky bearing witness to their promises. The homestead that had been a burden and a battlefield was transforming into something new, a home, a beginning, a foundation for the future they would build together. Over the next weeks, as summer mellowed toward autumn, Faith and Fletcher worked side by side to repair the damage from Brennan's attacks and complete the improvements needed to prove up the claim. But now, they worked with hope rather than desperation, with joy rather than grim determination. Fletcher proved to be everything Faith could have hoped for in a partner. He was tireless in his work, patient with her when she didn't know how to do something, and gentle in ways that constantly surprised her. He'd lived rough for so long, survived so much hardship, but he hadn't let it make him hard. Instead, he channeled all that strength into protection and care. The neighboring homesteaders noticed the change in both of them. When they gathered for a barn raising at the Schmidt place in September, Mrs. Anderson pulled Faith aside with a knowing smile. "So," she said, watching Fletcher hoist a massive beam into place with 3 other men. "When's the wedding?" Faith felt her cheeks heat. "We haven't discussed anything formal yet. That man looks at you like you hung the moon, and you look at him the same way. Don't wait too long, dear. Life is short and uncertain out here. When you find happiness, you should grab it with both hands." Faith thought about those words that night as she and Fletcher sat outside her cabin, their cabin now, in all but legal name, watching the sunset. Fletcher had moved his few belongings from his camp by the creek into the small barn he'd built, maintaining propriety even as everyone in the county knew they were courting. "Fletcher," Faith said, leaning against his shoulder, "how long do you think we should wait?" "Wait for what?" He was cleaning his rifle, his hands moving with practiced efficiency over the weapon. "To get married." Fletcher's hands stilled. He set the rifle aside carefully and turned to look at her, his blue eyes searching her face. "Is that what you want, to marry me?" "Yes," Faith said simply. "I want to wake up next to you every morning. I want to build this homestead into a real ranch with you. I want to have children with you and grow old watching sunsets just like this one. I want all of it, Fletcher. With you." Fletcher was quiet for a long moment, and Faith's heart began to pound with sudden fear that perhaps she'd presumed too much, moved too fast. But then he smiled, and it was like the sun breaking through clouds. "I've got nothing to offer you but hard work and a scarred-up heart," he said. "No money, no family name, no prospects beyond what we build here together. But if you'll have me anyway, Faith Keller, then yes. Yes, I'll marry you. Tomorrow if you want. Today if we could find a preacher willing." Faith laughed, giddy with happiness. "Let's at least wait until Sunday. Give people time to gather. I want our neighbors there. I want Doc Hartley and Captain Frost and everyone who helped us stand against Brennan. I want them to see what they helped save, not just a homestead, but a future, a family." "Sunday, then," Fletcher agreed. He pulled her into his lap, and Faith went willingly, tucking her head under his chin. "I'll ride into town tomorrow, speak to the preacher, file the proper papers. We'll do this right." They sat together as the sky deepened from blue to purple to black, as the stars emerged one by one, as the night sounds of the prairie rose around them. And Faith felt a peace settle over her that she'd never known before, a certainty that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The wedding took place the following Sunday at the small church in Ellsworth. Faith wore a simple dress of cream-colored cotton that Mrs. Anderson had helped her sew, with wildflowers from the prairie woven into her hair. Fletcher wore new trousers and a shirt purchased from the general store, his long hair tied back, his beard neatly trimmed. The church was packed with homesteaders and townspeople, all wanting to witness the marriage of the woman who'd stood up to Raymond Brennan and the mountain man who'd helped her win. Doc Hartley gave Faith away in place of her father, his eyes suspiciously bright as he placed her hand in Fletcher's. The ceremony itself passed in a blur for Faith. She heard herself make her vows, heard Fletcher promise to love and cherish her in sickness and health, for richer or poorer, until death parted them. His voice was steady and sure, no doubt or hesitation, and when he slid a simple gold band onto her finger, Faith felt tears slip down her cheeks. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the preacher said with a smile. "Fletcher, you may kiss your bride." And Fletcher did, pulling Faith close and kissing her with such tenderness and love that the whole congregation broke into applause and cheers. When they finally pulled apart, both smiling, Faith saw that Fletcher's eyes were bright with unshed tears too. They celebrated at the church hall, with food contributed by every family in attendance. There was music and dancing, and Faith laughed as Fletcher twirled her around the floor with surprising grace for such a large man. "Where did you learn to dance?" she asked breathlessly. "My ma taught all us kids," Fletcher said, spinning her again. "Said it was important to be civilized, even on the frontier. Never thought I'd have occasion to use it, but I'm grateful for the lessons now." As the sun set and the celebration began to wind down, Fletcher and Faith said their goodbyes and rode back to their homestead, truly theirs now, bound together by marriage and love and shared purpose. Fletcher had added to the cabin in preparation for their wedding, building a proper bedroom onto the side with a real bed frame and mattress ordered from Dodge City. That night, as they lay together in the darkness, Faith curled against Fletcher's chest, she felt complete in a way she never had before. The grief over her father's loss would always be part of her, but it no longer defined her. She'd built something new from that loss, found strength she didn't know she possessed, and found love when she wasn't even looking for it. "What are you thinking?" Fletcher asked, his fingers tracing idle patterns on her shoulder. "That I'm happy," Faith said simply. "For the first time since my father died, I'm truly happy. Is that wrong, to be happy when he's gone?" "Your father would want you happy," Fletcher said firmly. "Any parent wants that for their child. He'd be proud of you, Faith. Proud of how you fought for this land, proud of the woman you are." Faith tilted her head up to kiss him. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything. For appearing when I needed you most, for standing with me, for loving me." "Loving you is the easiest thing I've ever done," Fletcher said. "Building a life with you will be my greatest honor." The seasons turned and the homestead prospered. Fletcher's knowledge of farming and Faith's determination proved a powerful combination. They expanded the cultivated acreage, added more livestock, built a proper barn and a chicken coop. By the following summer, their claim was not just proven up, but thriving. In June of 1879, Faith discovered she was pregnant. She told Fletcher one evening as they sat on the porch he'd built, watching a thunderstorm roll across the prairie in the distance. "I saw Doc Hartley in town today," she said, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. "He confirmed what I suspected. We're going to have a baby, Fletcher. In January, he thinks." Fletcher went absolutely still, his face cycling through shock, joy, and fear in rapid succession. "A baby," he repeated. "Faith, are you all right? Is everything?" "Everything's fine," Faith assured him, touched by his concern. "Doc says I'm healthy and strong. The baby should be too." Fletcher pulled her into his arms, holding her with such care as if she'd suddenly become fragile. "A baby," he said again, and this time his voice was full of wonder. "We're going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Faith asked, though she could see the answer on his face. "Happy doesn't begin to cover it," Fletcher said. He placed his hand over hers on her stomach. "I never thought I'd have this. A wife, a home, a family. After Emma died, after everything, I thought that part of life was lost to me forever. But here you are, giving me everything I thought I'd lost." They sat together as the storm moved closer, bringing the scent of rain and the promise of growth. And Faith felt the future unfold before them, a child, then perhaps more children, years of hard work and laughter, of building something lasting together. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer and fall. Faith continued working as long as she was able, though Fletcher fussed over her constantly, trying to take on more of the heavy labor. The neighboring women came by regularly with advice and hand-sewn baby clothes, embracing Faith fully into their community. In late January of 1880, on a bitterly cold night with snow falling thick outside, Faith went into labor. Fletcher rode for Doc Hartley while Mrs. Anderson and Mrs. Schmidt stayed with Faith. The doctor arrived just past midnight, and after 12 hours of labor that tested Faith's strength and Fletcher's sanity, their son was born. Fletcher held his son for the first time with shaking hands, tears streaming down his face as he looked at the tiny, perfect baby with a shock of dark hair. "He's beautiful," Fletcher whispered. "Faith, he's perfect." "What should we name him?" Faith asked, exhausted but glowing with joy. Fletcher looked at the baby, then at Faith, then back at his son. "I'd like to name him Thomas after your father, if that's all right with you." Faith felt tears spring to her eyes. "Thomas Yates, that's perfect. Papa would have loved that." Little Thomas was a healthy, happy baby who quickly became the center of their world. Fletcher proved to be a devoted father, carrying his son everywhere, talking to him constantly, showing him the homestead and the prairie beyond. "He can't understand you yet," Faith said with amusement one spring morning, finding Fletcher explaining the intricacies of fence building to their 4-month-old son. "He will someday," Fletcher said seriously. "And when he does, he'll know this land, know how we fought for it, know what it means to stand up for what's yours." The years passed in a blur of work and love and growth. Thomas grew into a sturdy, adventurous boy with his father's blue eyes and his mother's determination. When he was 3, Faith gave birth to twin girls, Emma and Grace, named for Fletcher's lost sister and the quality that had brought them all together. The homestead expanded into a proper ranch, with cattle grazing on the prairie and crops filling fields that Faith and Fletcher had cleared together. They built a larger house to accommodate their growing family, though they kept the original cabin as a workshop and reminder of where they'd started. Raymond Brennan had been sentenced to 5 years in federal prison for his crimes, and when he was released, he left Kansas entirely, a broken man. His ranch had been sold to pay his legal debts, divided up among the homesteaders he'd tried to drive off. Justice, slow and imperfect though it was, had prevailed. On a warm evening in August of 1885, 7 years after Fletcher had first appeared by the creek cutting timber, Faith and Fletcher sat on the porch of their home, watching their children play in the yard. Thomas, now 5 1/2, was teaching his younger sisters how to skip stones in the creek. Their laughter floated on the summer breeze, a sound more precious than gold. "Did you ever imagine this?" Faith asked, her hand finding Fletcher's. "When you first came down from the mountains, did you imagine this is where you'd end up?" Fletcher lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "Never. I thought I'd help you build a fence, maybe stand guard for a few weeks, then move on. I didn't plan on falling in love. Didn't plan on finding everything I'd been searching for without knowing I was searching." "I'm glad you stayed," Faith said softly. "I'm glad you saw me standing there against Brennan and decided I was worth helping." "You were always worth it," Fletcher said. "You just needed someone to stand with you until you could see your own strength." Faith leaned her head on his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of him, wood smoke and leather and the prairie wind. "We built something good here, didn't we?" "We built something extraordinary," Fletcher corrected. He gestured to the house, the barn, the fields, the children. "This is everything I never dared to hope for, and it all started with a stubborn woman who refused to be run off her land." "And a mountain man who knew how to build fences," Faith added with a smile. "And fell in love while doing it," Fletcher finished. As the sun set over the Kansas prairie, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, Thomas came running up to the porch, his sisters trailing behind him. "Papa, Mama, come see. I found a frog by the creek. Can we keep him?" Fletcher laughed and stood, scooping up his son. "Let's go look at this frog and discuss the finer points of frog ownership." Faith followed her family down to the creek, her heart full to overflowing. She thought of her father, buried beneath the cottonwood tree that was now part of a thriving homestead. She thought of Fletcher's sister Emma, whose death had set in motion the chain of events that brought him into Faith's life. The grief would always be there, but it was tempered now by joy, by love, by the knowledge that from loss could come unexpected grace. The years continued to pass, bringing both challenges and triumphs. There were droughts that tested their resilience and harsh winters that demanded every ounce of strength they possessed. But Faith and Fletcher faced each obstacle together, their love deepening with every shared hardship, every victory won side by side. When Thomas turned 18 in 1898, he announced his intention to study agriculture at the state college, wanting to bring new farming techniques back to help the family ranch prosper. The twins, at 15, were already showing different paths. Emma had inherited her mother's head for business and talked of opening a general store in Ellsworth, while Grace shared her father's love of the land and animals, spending hours working with the horses. Faith, now 42, sometimes looked in the mirror and saw the girl she'd been, standing alone against 5 riders, wondering how she'd find the strength to survive the next day. That girl seemed like a stranger now, though Faith remembered her fear, her determination, her desperate loneliness. "What are you thinking about?" Fletcher asked, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. At 47, he was still strong and vital, though his hair was now streaked with silver and the lines around his eyes had deepened. "About the girl I was when you found me," Faith said, leaning back against him. "How different everything is now." "You were never weak, even then," Fletcher said, kissing her temple. "You were always strong, I just helped you see it." "We helped each other see it," Faith corrected. "You were as lost as I was, Fletcher. We found each other at exactly the right moment." "Divine timing," Fletcher agreed. "Or blind luck. Either way, I'm grateful for it every day." That evening, the whole family gathered for dinner around the large table Fletcher had built years ago. The conversation flowed easily, Thomas talking excitedly about his college plans, Emma describing a new business idea, Grace asking her father's advice about training a particularly stubborn colt. Faith watched her family, her heart swelling with love and pride. After dinner, after the children had dispersed to their various evening activities, Faith and Fletcher walked out to the original cabin, which they'd preserved exactly as it had been that first summer. They stood in the doorway, looking at the simple interior, the rope bed, the old stove, the table where they'd shared their first meal together. "Sometimes I miss it," Faith admitted. "The simplicity of it, just the two of us, fighting for survival, falling in love." "I don't," Fletcher said honestly. "Those were good days, important days, but these days are better. I'll take a full table and children's laughter over simplicity any day." Faith smiled. "You're right. I wouldn't trade our family for anything." They walked back to the main house hand in hand, as they'd done countless times over the past 20 years. The prairie stretched endlessly around them, golden in the fading light, and Faith felt the same sense of belonging she'd felt that first night when Fletcher had stood guard, when she'd realized she wasn't alone anymore. "I love you," she said, the words as true now as they'd been the first time she'd spoken them. "I love you too," Fletcher replied, pulling her close. "Today, tomorrow, and every day after, that's my promise, Faith. Always." And standing there in the twilight, surrounded by the land they'd fought for, and the life they'd built together, Faith knew that promise would hold. Through whatever challenges the future might bring, through the inevitable sorrows and the unexpected joys, they would face it all together, the stubborn homesteader and the mountain man who'd helped her build fences and found a home in the process. The stars emerged overhead, the same stars that had witnessed their first kiss, their wedding vows, the birth of their children. The prairie wind whispered through the grass, carrying with it the promise of tomorrow, the memory of yesterday, and the perfect contentment of this moment. Their story had begun with a shot in the dust and a stranger by a creek. It had grown through struggle and determination, through love discovered and nurtured, through fences built and battles won. And now, 20 years after that first encounter, it continued, still a testament to the power of standing together, of refusing to give up, of finding love in the most unexpected places. Faith Keller Yates stood in her husband's arms and looked at the life they'd created, and knew with absolute certainty that every hardship, every moment of fear, every obstacle overcome had been worth it to arrive at this perfect moment of peace, love, and belonging. The homestead that had once been a battleground was now a sanctuary, a legacy for their children and grandchildren yet to come. The fences Fletcher had helped her build still stood strong, marking boundaries and protecting what was theirs. But the most important thing they'd built together wasn't made of wood and wire. It was the family they'd created, the love that sustained them, the partnership that had transformed two lonely, grieving souls into something whole and beautiful and lasting. As they walked back to their home, their children's voices drifting through the open windows, Faith sent up a silent prayer of thanks for the father who'd given her this land, for the mountain man who'd helped her keep it, for the life they'd built together from dust and determination and love. The story that had begun with conflict had become a love story, and that love story had become a legacy. And in the end, that was all anyone could hope for: to love deeply, to fight for what mattered, and to build something lasting from the raw materials of courage and hope. Fletcher squeezed her hand as they climbed the porch steps, and Faith squeezed back, a silent conversation in a language only they spoke. They had weathered every storm together, and they would weather all the storms yet to come the same way, hand in hand, heart to heart. Two souls who'd found each other at exactly the right moment and built something extraordinary from that chance encounter. The door opened, and warmth and light and laughter spilled out. Faith and Fletcher stepped inside together, crossing the threshold into another evening, another moment of their shared life, another page in the story they were still writing together. And outside, the Kansas prairie stretched endlessly under a canopy of stars, bearing witness to their happiness, holding their history in every blade of grass, every fence post, every inch of land they'd fought for and won and turned into home. This was their legacy, their triumph, their happily ever after, earned through struggle, sealed with love, and built to last for generations to come. And as Faith closed the door behind them, shutting out the night and embracing the warmth of family and home, she knew that whatever the future held, they would face it together, just as they always had, always together. Always home, always in love. The end of one story, the beginning of countless more, all woven together in the tapestry of a life well lived, a love well earned, and a homestead transformed from a dream into a lasting legacy of courage, determination, and the extraordinary power of two hearts that refused to give up on the land, on each other, or on the beautiful future they built together from nothing but hope and love, and the simple act of standing side by side.